This this is the Impressions Exchange podcast.
Impressions Exchange podcast,
where all topics impacting the graphic imaging and printing industry are addressed via in-depth news coverage, analysis, and timely interviews.
The Impressions Exchange podcast. I'm Ashley Roberts, your host of today's episode. In part 2 of our Postal series, I chat with Brad Duncan, account director at Continuum, a marketing execution and creative services partner that is part of the CJK Group. Brad recently attended the National Postal Forum and shares his thoughts on the event. He also explains zone-based pricing and the importance of co-mail consolidation and postal optimization. He also discusses the role of AI and the future of direct mail. So stay tuned for our conversation. Brad, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's great. So this month, a little bit of a theme here on the Impressions Exchange channel. We're talking about postal trends. The National Postal Forum happened not too long ago, and you were there at NPF. So can you maybe talk a little bit about your experience there, some of your, key takeaways, trends, things that you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, I think NPF was actually pretty interesting this year. Last year was actually my first time attending the conference. And last year, I think a lot of people's first times, frankly. It was very interesting to see how many people showed up. As the largest NPF in recent history. And that was just because there's so much uncertainty around the transitions in the Postal Service, with Louis Joy leaving and David Steiner coming in. I think there was just a lot of kind of like big questions. And last year, I felt like a lot of the big questions didn't get answered. There was a lot of kind of just general talk, and the Postal Service is doing great. The tenor of this year was very different, in my opinion. It was much more informative, and the post office really positioned it as an opportunity to like drive industry partnership. I think that was the thing that stood out to me the most. The Postmaster General's keynote address was around your postal service. I think they said "you're" no less than 30 times in that address, but it was very clear that they were keying in to the fact that they recognize that they're part of our value chain. And that was interesting because it was, I think historically the Postal Service has kind of been the Postal Service, and they want you to do it their way for you to interact with them. And it seemed like that was changing a little bit in a way that was kind of like, hey, we want more input from you. We want more kind of connection with the industry to understand what the industry wants. And we want to make sure these network and infrastructure changes we're doing are going to be impactful for you and impactful for your clients, it was a really nice change of tone. The big things for me coming across, obviously the postal impacts, the pressure we're feeling around postage increases, lots of narratives around using incentives and promotions and how important they're going to be. And then also just kind of some stuff around the network modernization, where they're at. I think there's still some big questions on where we're at in network modernization, that we haven't seen kind of the full picture and what the roadmap really looks like. But there was more detail than I think there was in the year previous. And the big thing was just how important data and AI and some of these tools that are in the market are becoming in the direct mail industry as a whole, not just to the Postal Service, but to the entire kind of process map of mail, and how we can leverage those in kind of building smarter workflows to hopefully create better conversion and maybe mail more as kind of printers and agencies and mail owners and all the people that are kind of wanting to be there.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, I wasn't there, but I also heard from others who attended that the, kind of feeling around the address from Steiner was different. It made it, like you kind of intimated, that it was a little more, focusing on the people, you, and maybe a little more hopeful, making people feel hopeful. Did you, other people that you talked to, do you feel like the energy was different this year because of that?
A little bit. I think, from the different industry folks, and I think that's one of the best things about the forum is that it does bring kind of this mass meeting of the minds. I mean, obviously we can travel to plants and meet our vendors. We can travel to our customer sites and meet our customers, but it is such a great mix of all the parties to kind of understand what's going on and what we're all feeling in the market. I think that there was a fairly positive reception to kind of that change in scope and narrative. And then talking to folks that are on MTAC and some of these more kind of civilian side organizations that can have influence in the Postal Service, they kind of echoed that sentiment. Hey, they've seen that change in their meetings as well, where they're kind of seeing that the Postal Service is hearing things that maybe they hadn't heard in the past, and actually actioning them versus saying, it's just that we're the Postal Service. Like, I think it's a bit of a different narrative for sure. And I think from everyone I talked to, it seemed like everyone was reluctantly positive, maybe is how I would put it. Obviously, I think there's still fiscal concerns about the viability of the Postal Service long term. That's always going to be a question in the room. But I do think that there was a kind of a momentum that everyone felt.
Right. Right. So, on the journalism side, one of the things that when I talk to print service providers, marketers, one of the big concerns is the rising postage costs. And I think you did mention it at the beginning. So how significant could annual, these 5% postage increases, become for profitability of direct mail?
Massively. I mean, I think, a single 5% increase this year is something that we all kind of planned for. I think that the one thing that post office has done a decent job of, and organizations that they're doing like MTAC and PCCs are doing a better job of getting the narrative out around, is kind of sharing the prospectus of what future postal increases look like. I think we're able to kind of translate that to our customers and forecasting and making sure they're aware that these burdens are going to be felt. But like you can't take the cost out of the room. I mean, we look at a lot of our heavy direct mail clients. Postage in some cases on these programs for them is 60, 70, 80% of the total cost burden, right?
Right.
And so if you have a $10 million a year postage burden and I give you a 5% increase, that's a $500,000 you just added to your budget. And so, when we look at things like customer acquisition costs or returns on ad spend, those things are immediately impacted by it. And so I'd say that like the one thing they've done a good job of is helping us prepare and manage expectations around what postage like increases are going to be. That what that does is it forces hard decisions. Do we have to cut circulation? Do we change formats and go away from flats to a cheaper format like letters or postcards? Do we suppress more? Do we only mail the highest deciles? Like there's lots of marketing questions that then come out of that. And it's kind of a little bit of a shell game. The post office is increasing costs. We're decreasing volume. Those things are at odds in a way. Like they're trying to drive more revenue into the business, pay for their infrastructure. We're trying to cut costs out of our business to make sure that we can, keep mail profitable. And it just makes for a really hard kind of pinch point for both marketers and the Postal Service.
Right. So something, I'll be honest here, I don't know a whole lot about. So I'm hoping you can talk to me about it, and we can set the stage a little bit. So I know USPS is moving more toward like zone-based pricing. So what does this shift mean operationally? Well, first, can you talk to me about zone-based pricing and kind of explain it to me? But then also, what does it mean operationally for print service providers?
Yeah, so zone-based pricing is a tough topic because I don't think the post office knows exactly what they want to do with it yet. We know that they did put forward last year a plan for zone-based pricing on letters. We know that zone-based pricing already exists in the parcel space to some capacity. But the waters are still really murky on exactly what that means. If and when a plan comes that the PRC actually approves, what that will mean is geography becomes drastically more important to how mail moves. Entry points are going to become more important. Maybe even the geography of the print service providers is going to become more important. In some ways, that presents values to businesses like ours because we use a network of printers across the U.S. And so if they went to zone-based pricing, it's almost like a competitive advantage for us because we can say, oh, we have this network of printers. We can print West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, and the Midwest. But I think where that's going to challenge a lot of print service providers, especially on that kind of smaller to mid scale, is they're not going to have multi-site geographies where they can kind of reap the benefits of what zone-based pricing might feel or present. And they're going to pay the burden of what it means from having to ship from the East Coast to the West Coast if you're an East Coast shop. And so I think right now it's probably a little early to talk about the true impacts because we don't know what they're going to be. I think that every print service provider should be thinking about it. And I think if anything, it may lead to some further consolidation. We'll see printers buy other printers, or some of these bigger conglomerates continue to expand their market share by purchasing, if they're heavily on the East Coast, we may see them try to buy up a shop on the West Coast to try and, you know, offset this zone-based pricing kind of matrix that's going to exist. But the water is so murky on like what that zone-based plan truly is going to look like, and then what the pricing kind of lever is going to be for how zones affect things on mail moving across the US, that it's hard to say really like what an impact's going to be today.
Mm-hmm. I know, we don't have a crystal ball, and I know you said it's hard to kind of see what that would be like, but for smaller businesses that don't have multiple locations or don't have partnerships with, other PSPs on the other side of the country, I mean, is this, you mentioned consolidation. Could this potentially impact the number of, print service providers in the direct mail space? I mean, they might start diversifying. I'm thinking like, should smaller direct mail companies start diversifying into other segments to kind of offset this? Or are we not to that point yet, do you think?
I don't think we're to that point. I'm still not holistically convinced that they were going to get the zone-based pricing in the next 2 years, maybe 5 years. And again, I'm not on MTAC, so I don't have maybe that full kind of like backroom dealings, but I think that it definitely is something that could be considered. I think the other thing this really opens the door for is some of these kind of like co-processing methodologies that are out there, whether it's commingle or co-pal or co-mail. Leveraging those partnerships may become critically more important, because you'll be able to push that mail with a higher saturation across the US. And then depending on what those co-pal and those co-processors do, I mean, we've already seen it, right? Like I think ALG opened up on the East Coast recently. UBM bought OnRoof recently. So like there's already some maybe, and I don't know if those are related or if that's strategic, but like I do think that there's going to be some impacts there. And that may be the lever for these smaller shops to still compete in the market, retain market share, is to kind of explore those opportunities more.
Printing United Alliance is the leading member-based printing and graphic arts association in North America, with over 70 years of history and more than 20,000 members worldwide. We're here to support printing professionals like you with the tools, resources, and information you need to grow your business, sharpen your skills, and expand your network. Whether you're a printer, supplier, student, or educator, we've built our community to serve everyone who's passionate about the future of print. An Alliance membership is a smart, cost-effective way to stay current on the latest trends, connect with industry leaders, and give your business the competitive edge it deserves. Head over to printing.org/membership to learn more about the memberships we offer. Let's move the printing industry forward together.
So you actually segued nicely into my next question, which is about co-mail consolidation. So, you just gave an example of how that's going to be important in the coming years. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why co-mail consolidation is going to, be more important?
Yes. I mean, the opportunity to take your mail, regardless of your size or breadth or cadence, and put it into a bigger mail pool will pay dividends today and in the future. We see that for, small clients. We see it for even large clients that have smaller cohorts in certain states that kind of are advantageous for that particular type of processing. I think that, regardless of what happens with zone-based pricing, with the incremental increases we're seeing in postage year over year over year over year for perpetuity, it may appear, like those strategies become critically more important, because the way postage works today is obviously based on your sortation and discounts you can achieve. By being able to put your mail with other people's mail going into the pool at the same time, you can lower that, or you can increase your sortation basically amounts, and that'll allow you to lower your postage rates. And so in any market where postage continually increases, those are going to become more and more important to your postal optimization strategy to try and kind of keep that cost burden down. But then also, as we get to that zone-based pricing matrix, it may be more important because it unlocks those geographical discounts that you wouldn't be able to achieve on your own.
Mm-hmm. Are there any misconceptions that print service providers ever have about co-mailing or postal optimization, things that you hear?
Yeah, so it's kind of a two-parter, right? Like I think On postal optimization, I think the biggest misconception is it's just about cutting cost. When we look at postal optimization with our customers, it's not just how do we get the lowest possible postage rate? Obviously, that's a key factor, but it's almost a speed and cost matrix. We're looking at postal optimization of, hey, when do your in-homes need to be for your product or your product to get in hand and your conversion rates to be what you need them to be? But we're also looking at it from like trying to figure out what's the appropriate sortation rates. Hey, can I use a co-processing tool, which may take 1, 2, 3 days more, but do those 1, 2, 3 days more actually have an adverse effect on response? And if they don't, do those cost savings bring our customer acquisition values, down? And that allows us to be more effective in our mailing. So I think it's kind of like postal optimization is always thought of as just cost cutting. It's not. There's multiple facets to it. That's something that I think PSPs and MSPs, or really any person that's working in the postal market, needs to kind of pay attention to. And then on co-mill consolidation, everyone just thinks it takes more time and it's more complex. The commingle and co-mill partners that we have, they've gotten so sophisticated on their logistics management, their platforming, how we get mail into their kind of system so that we can lever those advantages, that it's gotten much easier to do, to me, at least in the last probably 10 years, maybe even 5. And I think that if you're not looking at co-mill or co-processing of any type, like, you can't avoid it now. You have to look at it so that you can make sure that you're prepared for what's to come, because and transparently, they're getting so much better. And I think a lot of people used to think of co-mill or co-processing as a bit of a black hole. You send it to them and hopefully it gets to where it's supposed to go. And there's so much more transparency in the process now, that, and even with like mail tracking and things like that, where we can kind of even have like an agnostic view to be able to make sure our mail is getting where it is and getting it there when we want it to be. There's so many more checks and balances that we can kind of take some of that uncertainty out of the process.
One of the other, ways to cut costs are the USPS promotions, which I know, mail was one of the segments that I covered a few, several years ago. And in the beginning, I did feel like there was an awareness factor, getting people used to the promotions and the changing promotions. I do personally, I think it's a little more utilized now, but it's still underutilized. So why is participation still relatively low? And how can we, bring further awareness to these promotions that the USPS has?
It's a good question. I think that the USPS promotions team has done a great job creating some cost saving levers that are actually really not that hard to utilize when it comes to just the pure like checks and balances you need to do. I think the process that still makes it a little more difficult than maybe it needs to be is, frankly, getting it into the system, getting the approvals, understanding the actual kind of like requirements that you need to do. If you go on to Postal One or the Business Customer Gateway and start to do investigations on these promotions on your own, you might be very scared or, confused by this mass workbook that has all of these requirements. And sometimes the wording's a little ambiguous. What I would say to those folks that kind of feel that way is the USPS promotions team is very accessible. You can reach out to them via email. I've had calls with them. I met with one of them at the Postal Forum in depth. They are extraordinarily willing to give you time to help you understand the process and to help you ensure that you can kind of manipulate your programs to fit the needs of the promotion. And so for me, I think the reason people don't do it is because it looks like a big scary animal when you look at it from just the paper. But when you actually dig into them, they're really not that hard to leverage. The integrated technology one, for instance, can be leveraged very easily. The tactile and sensory one, you can actually lever that one a number of ways. That's not super cost impactful on the production side, that pays extraordinary dividends, especially when you consider, again, postage is 60, 70, 80% of your cost burden. So I think it's more of what you like, the devil you don't know kind of thing. Like, you just don't know what's in it. And so folks are a little worried about it. I think that really also is on your print service provider or your mail service provider to really educate you on that and be more versed on it. I mean, this is something that we do for value add to our clients. We manage all the promotions for our customers. We put in the tickets, we manage the approvals. We work with the promotions team to ensure that we can achieve those approvals. when a new promotion exists, we do an exorbitant amount of research to make sure that we can kind of figure out how to leverage it. And I think that's the part that it's just that learning curve is still out there. And I think the ever changing nature of the promotions is challenging. Like they change year over year over year, and sometimes that can be a little scary. And I think that's why we've seen the male growth incentive get adopted more, is because it hasn't changed in the last 3 or 4 years. It's been pretty consistent, and so people are a little more comfortable with how it works. Um, I also think that if I have one big bone to pick with the post office, it's their kind of user experience platforms, or they're challenging to use, and they're exhaustive. Some of that's just due to the infrastructure that they have and the complexity they have in their organizations. But I think that's a challenge too, and finding the right partner to help you navigate that can really help you figure out how to leverage those promotions in what is a very not painful way for a pretty decent amount of discount if you really think about it.
Right, right. Well, thank you for that. And I love the advice to just reach out to USPS,
Yeah.
go to the source. I think that's great advice there. So one of the big things that we talk about, it's, at all of our events, and I'm sure at NPF, focus on AI. So how are you seeing AI and predictive analytics changing, or influencing direct mail strategy?
It's everywhere. I don't know how to put it. And I think it's AI is one of those probably scary buzzwords because everyone uses it, and then every time you hear about it, it's a very service level explanation. But I mean, it is. It's from the data and analytics side, from kind of building segments or kind of using it to determine the deciles that you're going to mail, or what targets fall into what deciles. There is so much you can do with it when you have a good partner that understands AI and or good people in your organization that know how to leverage it. It is immensely critical in becoming sharper at like who you're mailing, why you're mailing them, and in some cases even what your kind of messaging should be. I mean, we're also seeing it on the creative side, whether it's iterating multiple versions of pieces for different use cases, whether it's even plugging AI into the process to generate the mail piece based on a number of parameters and prompts. I think too, like even on the logistics side, I mean, I know our logistics partners are using it to optimize, and the post office is using it to optimize, logistics routes. The post office also, they talked extensively on their use of it, specifically on the promotions approvals. So I forgot what exactly their metrics were, but it was over 50% of the tickets that are getting put in are measured by AI first and then reviewed. And eventually the goal is to have it where all of those promotion tickets are reviewed via AI for approval. And so I think that, they're using it to kind of speed that process up, which in some cases could be another burden from a promotions adoption. If I put in a ticket and I'm a trigger mailer or I'm a quick turn mail provider or producer, you could say, hey, I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to put a ticket in and wait for a week for an approval. Well, I can tell you that, we put in 130 plus tickets a month. Those tickets are usually approved within 48 hours. So we're seeing them leverage it in that way. And then even on the back end, when we think about mail tracking and data feeds and conversion feeds, people are using AI agents to do triggers and flags of like concerns that might come up in their mail programs. Hey, this deliverability flag popped up because program X didn't get in home based on our in-home timing. You should go look at it. So it's literally proliferating pretty much across the work stream. And it's just making marketers more efficient. It's making hopefully our logistics more efficient. And it's kind of making some of those burdensome process less burdensome.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, sounds like there are a lot of benefits. Do you ever hear anyone who's a little hesitant because of like data security? I mean, I know things are secure, but there's obviously always inherent risk with anything. But
yes,
do you hear about that?
100%. Yeah, I think the main challenge there is just, especially when we think about these highly regulated industries that use mail, whether it's, industries that are worried about HIPAA or various, the various kind of compliance regulations that exist across the US, fairness in lending, things like that. There are lots of reasons to be hesitant, but I don't think that those reasons can't be overcome through strong compliance guidance, strong, legal kind of teams doing the diligence to make sure that the processes you're using are still viable. And frankly, there's a lot of PSPs that are vetting their AI solutions for things like the SOC 2 compliances or the HIPAA compliances and things like that. And I think that's where some of these like Obviously, your generic learning models, like just using ChatGPT on your laptop, probably won't want to throw data in there. But if your organization has an embedded AI tool that they can use, and your compliance organization can vet and approve that for use cases, then there should be very little concern that those tools will kind of resonate with compliance risk.
So how's mail tracking integration impacting or changing client expectations around direct mail performance?
Drastically, I would say. I think that, mail tracking has existed for the better part of probably 2+ decades. And in the early days, it was very rudimentary, and very kind of not super straightforward. Even if you were to get that feed on your own from the USPS, it can be difficult to understand. There's a litany of scans throughout the process and the way they track. And that's another thing that's a little challenging. Like if you got an API feed from the IV, which is informed visibility, those feeds, without some good diligence and hard work, can be overwhelming. And I think that as we've seen tools in the market, the gray hairs, the IntelliSense, the SnailWorks of the world come into play and mature, those tools are becoming drastically more important. And frankly, are one of the main levers that are allowing us to really leverage direct mail into the omni-channel, or, mixed media strategies. I think that when we look at direct mail, like, the old school way, spray and pray, attribution based on a date window, probably getting cross attribution across multiple different sources of marketing. The mail tracking really helps us do a lot of things like sharpen our attribution windows, because we know to a fairly good amount of certainty when a majority of our mail is hitting in home. And in some cases, like especially on the letter side, mail tracking is much more mature, like 95% to 99%. We have a pretty good, understanding of if that mail is executing and getting in home in time. If there is a delay or what's happening, we can see when that's hitting a market. We're seeing customers leverage that for call centers and kind of leveraging call center, personnel even. We're seeing them use it for follow-up triggers for kind of the rest of the omni-channel or customer journey. It is really kind of a key part of future-proofing your mail for omni-channel, because it's going to give you that tail end that used to be an assumption. It's giving you a true trigger point that you can have confidence in, which I think is awesome. And we partner with Gray Hair personally. They're a phenomenal team, but like the tools that they have, and even some of the stuff they're now doing with like API integrations to drive that back into Salesforce or CRMs, like, and or providing tools that can go directly into your call center so they can look up a single piece and tell you if that piece got there, if it didn't, why. Like it's an amazing opportunity to leverage that data back into your business and make your systems and processes smarter.
Great. And so I have one final question here. Despite digital growth, direct mail is still effective. And so spray and pray methods aside, why does it remain effective? And maybe a second part of this question, how do you see it performing in the future?
Yeah. I think you're never going to beat the advantage of tactile. I think there's been some really interesting academic research in the last 2 years on this. Dr. Zhang put out a study with from Colorado State, and I think he produced it through MIT Sloan. But that paper was basically a kind of true live market study of what performs better, mail or digital, in a vacuum per se, with live audiences and live marketing. And it was a really interesting, if you've not read the paper, basically kind of the feedback was that there is a tangible and tactile advantage to mail that digitals can't replicate. I think we see that a lot in markets. We've seen books grow in the last couple of years. I mean, we thought the Kindle was going to kill the book. It didn't. There's still people that, Barnes and Noble still rocking, lots of books out the door all day long.
Yeah. And opening new stores. I think they opened a record number of stores last year or something, or plan to this year. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's really emerging out of a lot of the data, I've not seen a lot of academic data on this, but there's a lot of like kind of industry and sales-based data that millennials, Gen Z, even into Gen X, there seems to be a preference toward something physical, something tangible that they can touch and feel and kind of interact with. And then I think also there's just the staying power of direct mail. If you get a postcard and it's something that's relevant, you're likely to throw that in a drawer. Well, if that's a pop-up ad or an email, I mean, I get, 600 emails a day. I'm probably trashing it. So, but if the right vendor sends me the right piece of mail, it might be in this drawer right here. It might be on the fridge. And so I think there's something to be said about that staying power too, that really helps mail be tangible. And I think really the future of direct mail is frankly in that omni channel, to make sure that that mail is working with those other channels, making sure that those touch points are consistent, that you're getting consistent messaging across, that they feel relevant to each other, that they don't feel redundant, right? Like I think it's, if you send me 3 emails in a week and I get a direct mail piece on like the next Tuesday, it feels cumbersome. But if you kind of manage your 7 touch points in a way that I might get a postcard, and then you might see a TV ad, and then I might get an email, or might get a social ad, and then I might get another letter. Like there's ways to like build that into a real customer journey. And mail is now probably the only offline channel that can truly be built into that customer journey. Offline channels outside of that, whether it's billboards or point of sale, we can't ensure that our customers see those. We can infer that they have, but we can't really make sure, and we can't also attribute sales to it. It's very difficult to attribute sales to those channels. Direct mail is one of the few offline channels that you can truly attribute conversion to, because of, frankly, all the data that we can now pull from it, from things like informed visibility improvements on the Postal Service side, tools like Gray Hair for mail tracking, and also all of the cool ideas that we've seen with QR code scanning and conversion windows and pearls and all the fun things that are out there today.
Perfect. Well, Brad, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you about direct mail, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you as well.
I want to thank Brad for joining me on today's episode, and I want to thank all of you, our listeners. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Impressions Exchange podcast.